The boardroom fell into a stunned silence as David Brown rose to his feet, his janitor's work clothes a stark contrast to the sea of executive suits. His heart hammered against his ribs. "Don't sign the $4.2 billion deal," he declared, his voice ringing out with more force than he'd anticipated. Outside, the flash of cameras pulsed against the windows, where reporters waited to capture the historic moment. Amara Johnson, the 34-year-old CEO of Johnson Industries, met his gaze, her pen frozen just above the contract. Security personnel began to advance toward David. The future of his daughter hung precariously in the balance. Once a prodigy on Wall Street, now a man who mopped floors, he knew he had less than 10 seconds before he was forcibly removed. Amara lifted a hand, halting the guards. She commanded everyone to leave the room, except for him. The previous evening, David Brown had moved with practiced quiet through the executive wing of Johnson Industries, emptying wastebaskets as he had for the last year and a half. The polished corridors felt different after dark, stripped of the powerful figures in tailored suits and the echo of expensive shoes, free from the veneer of insincere smiles and strategic handshakes. He much preferred the honesty of the silence. He paused by the main conference room, seeing the lights were still on. While most of the executives had departed hours ago, he could discern a lone figure through the frosted glass. He recognized her silhouette instantly, Amara Johnson, the brilliant CEO who had inherited her father's empire at the age of 30. The break room was often filled with whispers about her genius and her ruthlessness. David, however, had learned that the safest path was to remain unseen. For a brief moment, he watched her, struck by how her posture, hunched over her work, resembled his own daughter concentrating on her school assignments. The thought of 9-year-old Naomi waiting for him at Ms. Robinson's apartment prompted him to check his watch. He had to complete his shift and retrieve her before 10. David began to push his cart onward, planning to circle back to the room later, but a sheaf of papers suddenly slid off the conference table, followed by Amara's weary sigh. Professional instinct compelled him to knock gently on the door. "Excuse me, ma'am. Should I come back later?" Her head shot up, surprise registering on her features as if she'd forgotten anyone else existed in the skyscraper. "No, it's all right. Please come in." Her voice was sharp, betraying the irritation of a broken concentration. As David stepped inside, Amara moved to collect her documents, fumbling and dropping several in her haste. He bent to help her, gathering the scattered pages. It was then that he saw it. A spreadsheet, its columns highlighted, displayed employee numbers across various divisions. His eyes locked onto a column titled Post-Acquisition Reductions. There, in stark red ink, were figures indicating thousands of roles slated for termination after the TechVision merger. This included the entire janitorial staff at the Chicago office. David's breath hitched when he saw his own department's code among those scheduled for outsourcing. His fingers clenched the paper as memories of Naomi's medical bills, the past due rent notice, and the insulin prescription she needed next week flooded his mind. The fragile stability he had painstakingly pieced together after losing everything was about to be shattered once more. "Thank you," Amara said, reaching for the documents. But David hesitated, his gaze still fixed on the damning numbers. She followed his line of sight, and a look of understanding crossed her face. "That's confidential," she stated, her tone hardening. "Of course, my apologies," David responded, handing her the papers with a carefully neutral expression he had mastered during his fall from grace 3 years prior. As he turned to go, Amara's voice stopped him. "You're David, aren't you?" The night shift. He paused, surprised she knew his name. "Yes, ma'am." She observed him for a long moment before dismissing him with a nod. "Good night." He completed the rest of his shift in a daze, his thoughts racing. By the time the sun rose, he had reached a decision. This was no longer just about his job. It was about every family that would be devastated while executives pocketed their bonuses. Some things were worth fighting for, even if it meant risking what little you had left. David Brown still possessed one asset from his days on Wall Street, an intimate knowledge of how these deals truly functioned and the devastating price they exacted. The morning of the signing was a media spectacle. Security was stringent, but David, a familiar maintenance worker, slipped through a service entrance without a second glance. In the small locker room, his fingers trembled slightly as he buttoned his uniform. Tucked in his pocket was an employee roster he'd printed from a maintenance computer, a list that represented families, years of dedication, and medical dependencies, the human element behind the cold figures. He doubted it would mean anything to someone like Amara Johnson, but he had to try. He owed it to Naomi, to himself, and to the part of him that had died when he had chosen silence once before. When he entered the boardroom, timing his arrival for precisely 5 minutes before the signing, no one paid him any mind. The invisibility of service staff was now his advantage. He stood near the water cooler, observing board members and executives exchanging congratulations as cameras flashed outside. Amara sat at the head of the long table, immaculate in a Navy power suit, her hair styled in intricate braids that were pulled back severely. She projected confidence, yet David saw the strain in her shoulders and the way her eyes occasionally flickered toward her CFO, Marcus Reed, who hovered nearby. When the documents were finally set before her, a subtle hesitation in her movement gave David the final impetus he needed. He moved forward just as a hush fell over the room and Amara lifted her pen. After her command cleared the room, David stood alone, facing Amara across the vast, polished table. Security guards stood watch just beyond the doors. The unsigned contract was a silent testament between them. "You have 60 seconds, she said, her voice a low, controlled hum, "to explain why I shouldn't have you arrested for this disruption." David held her gaze. "Because you already sense that something is wrong with this deal. I saw it in your hesitation." He placed the employee roster on the table. 4,722 people. They aren't just numbers on a page. They have families, medical conditions, mortgages. The projections Marcus Reed presented to you have been manipulated. The so-called cost savings are achieved by gutting the workforce while inflating executive compensation. He watched her eyes narrow, her mind clearly processing his words. How would a janitor know any of that? David took a deep breath. "Because before I cleaned this office, I analyzed mergers for Goldman Sachs. I did that until 3 years ago, when I refused to approve a deal almost identical to this one." Amara's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. She picked up the employee roster, her eyes scanning the names. "Even if you're telling the truth, the board has given its unanimous approval. The documents are ready for my signature." David didn't flinch. "Do the real financial models. You'll see TechVision is overvalued by at least 30%. Their innovation pipeline is barren. I found their R&D reports in a recycling bin. They are selling you an empty shell, and your board is complicit." The color drained from Amara's face. "That is an incredibly serious accusation." David nodded. "Apparently, it's one I'm willing to lose my job over." A tense silence filled the space between them. Finally, Amara pressed the intercom. "Inform everyone the signing has been postponed for 24 hours due to a technical issue." No further questions, she then turned back to David. "My penthouse, 8 o'clock tonight. Bring all the proof you have. If you are wasting my time, I will personally ensure you never find work in this city again." As security escorted him from the building, the gravity of his actions settled upon him. He had almost certainly lost his job, no matter the outcome. On the bus, he called Miss Robinson, asking if she could watch Naomi for a few more hours that evening. The elderly woman agreed, though her concerned inquiries about his early departure from work were difficult to evade. Back at his small apartment, David rummaged through boxes he'd never fully unpacked and found his old laptop with its financial analysis software. 3 years had passed, but certain skills were indelible. By 7:30, he had compiled a thorough analysis backing his claims. He changed into the only respectable clothes he owned, a white shirt and navy slacks that were now a bit loose, and made his way to the address Amara had given him. Her penthouse crowned a sleek downtown skyscraper. When the lobby security called up, David was surprised to hear Amara's voice on the other end, telling them to send him up immediately. The elevator ride was long enough for doubt to creep in, questioning his analysis, his decision, his very sanity for confronting one of the most powerful women in Chicago. The elevator doors opened directly into her apartment, a space that was both stunning and starkly impersonal. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a panoramic vista of the city, but the minimalist decor gave it the feel of a luxury hotel suite rather than a home. Amara stood by the windows, still in her business suit, a glass of amber liquid in her hand. "You're punctual," she observed, motioning to a dining table where several monitors were already set up. "Show me." Without any pleasantries, they immersed themselves in the data. David pointed out the discrepancies, the hidden liabilities, and the wildly inflated projections. As he guided her through his findings, he could see her sharp intellect at work as she questioned, challenged, and connected the dots. 2 intense hours flew by, and for a moment, David nearly forgot the chasm that separated their lives. That was, until his phone rang. It was Miss Robinson, her voice fraught with worry. "Naomi's fever has spiked again." "Spiked?" "I have to go," he said, hastily gathering his things. "My daughter is sick." Amara looked up, genuine human concern momentarily replacing the CEO's mask. "Is it serious?" David hesitated before admitting. "She has type 1 diabetes. Her blood sugar has been unstable." He trailed off. "I just have to get home." He was almost at the elevator when Amara called out, "Wait. I'll drive you." Before he could object, she had her keys and coat. The sheer incongruity of the situation struck him as they descended in the elevator, the CEO of Johnson Industries and her janitor heading to his modest apartment in her high-end SUV. The 20-minute drive was mostly silent, punctuated only by David's directions. When they arrived outside his building, with its peeling paint and a security door propped open by a brick, David felt a hot flush of shame, which he immediately pushed away. This was his reality, and he wouldn't apologize for it. "Thank you for the ride," he said formally, preparing to get out. To his surprise, Amara turned off the engine. "I'm coming in. If your daughter needs a doctor, I can help." The apartment was small, but immaculately kept, the discipline of a single father apparent in every tidy corner. Ms. Robinson met them at the door, her face a mask of confusion at the sight of the elegantly dressed woman with David. His attempt at an explanation was cut short by a weak whimper from Naomi's room. David rushed to his daughter's side and found her flushed and disoriented, her glucose monitor displaying dangerously high levels. "We have to get her to a hospital," he said, a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with the day's earlier confrontation. "I'll call an ambulance," Amara offered, reaching for her phone. David shook his head, the mental calculation swift and automatic. "The deductible for an ambulance is $2,000. I'll drive her." He didn't mention that his insurance had lapsed last month, or that this visit would bury him deeper in medical debt. Something in his expression must have conveyed this, because Amara simply stated, "I'm taking you both to Northwestern Memorial." Now her tone left no room for debate. Minutes later, they were racing through the city streets, Naomi wrapped in a blanket on David's lap. At the hospital, Amara spoke quietly with an intake nurse, and suddenly they were being led to a private room where a team of doctors materialized within moments. David sat by his daughter's bed, clutching her small hand as the medical staff worked around them. Amara stayed in the background, a silent, watchful presence, making calls in hushed tones. Hours crept by, and slowly, Naomi's condition began to stabilize. As dawn approached, she finally drifted into a peaceful sleep. In the quiet of the early morning, David and Amara sat in uncomfortable chairs outside Naomi's room, exhaustion etched on their faces. A nurse offered them coffee. "Why did you help us?" David finally asked the question that had been burning in his mind all night. Amara stared into her cup. "Maybe I'm tired of a world where decisions are made without ever seeing the people they affect." She looked up, her eyes meeting his. "Or maybe I wanted to understand how someone goes from Wall Street to pushing a janitor's cart." The invitation was clear. David hadn't shared his story with anyone since moving to Chicago, burying it beneath the daily struggle for survival. But the raw humanity of the night had dismantled his defenses. "I was a rising star at Goldman," he began softly, specializing in tech mergers. 4 years ago, I was the lead analyst on an acquisition, much like your TechVision deal. I discovered irregularities, massive layoffs masked as synergy optimization." He rubbed his weary eyes. "When I raised my concerns, my superiors told me to fix the numbers, not the deal. I refused." His voice grew heavy. "Then my wife, Laura, was diagnosed with a rare cancer. Suddenly, I was facing staggering medical bills, a terrified 6-year-old daughter, and a choice." Amara listened, her expression unreadable. "I chose my family over my principles. I revised the analysis. The deal closed. Thousands lost their jobs, but I kept mine, for 6 more months. They found a pretext to fire me right after Laura passed away. No severance, no insurance, my reputation ruined. A bitterness he thought he had buried resurfaced. The universe has a twisted sense of humor." Amara was quiet for a long moment. "And yet, knowing what it could cost you, you spoke up yesterday." David glanced toward Naomi's room. "Maybe I needed her to know that her father could still do the right thing, even when it was the hardest thing." The admission felt vulnerable. Amara nodded slowly. "I built my career by being tougher and more ruthless than any man in the room. My father taught me that sentiment is a liability in business." She paused. "But lately, I've wondered what the point of it all is. An empty penthouse, no life beyond the office, and decisions that look brilliant on paper but keep me awake at night." The morning light illuminated the shadows beneath her eyes. "I never see the David Browns affected by my choices. Until now." By the afternoon, Naomi was stable enough for discharge. David braced himself for the bill, only to be informed that it had been handled. Outside, Amara's driver was waiting. "I have to get back to the office," she said. "The board is in a panic over the delay." She handed David a business card with her personal number on the back. "I want to continue our discussion about TechVision. For now, take a few days off to be with Naomi. Your job is safe." The professional facade was back, but something fundamental had changed. David accepted the card, torn between gratitude and pride. As they parted, Naomi looked back at Amara. "Will you come visit us again?" she asked with a child's candor. Amara seemed taken aback. "I'd like that," she replied, a genuine smile softening her features for the first time. The following days felt surreal. David received a call from HR confirming his paid leave, and Naomi, with her incredible resilience, recovered quickly. They spent quiet evenings together, carefully avoiding the topic of what would happen upon his return to work. 5 days after that night at the hospital, their fragile peace was shattered. A breaking news alert lit up David's phone. Johnson Industries' acquisition of TechVision in jeopardy. CEO questions deal. Moments later, his phone rang. It was Amara, her voice tense. "They're coming for you. Marcus discovered you accessed company files. He's filed a police report for corporate espionage. Before David could process her words, a heavy knock rattled his apartment door. 2 police officers stood outside with a warrant. As they led him away in handcuffs, he saw Naomi's terrified face, Ms. Robinson holding her back. "It's going to be okay, sweetheart," he called out, his voice trembling. "Call Ms. Johnson." The next few hours were a blur of holding cells and interrogation rooms. Exhaustion and fear warred within him. What had he been thinking, challenging people with so much power? The door opened, and to his astonishment, Amara Johnson walked in, followed by an older, distinguished man with a briefcase. "Mr. Hargrove is the best defense attorney in Chicago," she said. "You're being released. Bail has been posted." David stared at her. "Why? Marcus is your CFO. The board is your responsibility." Amara's expression hardened. "Because they lied to me. I had an independent firm review the TechVision financials. Everything you said was true, and worse. Marcus and Samuel Carter have been taking kickbacks to push this deal." As they walked out, she draped her designer coat over his shoulders, a strangely intimate gesture in the sterile police station. "The board is trying to force me out. Tomorrow's emergency shareholder meeting will determine both of our futures." Outside, her car was waiting. "Naomi is at my penthouse with my assistant. I thought she'd be more comfortable there." The thoughtfulness of this act, amid the corporate war she was fighting, moved David deeply. As they drove, Amara outlined the battle ahead. "They're painting you as a disgruntled ex-financier with a grudge. They've already leaked your termination from Goldman to the press." David closed his eyes. "And you? What's your position?" Her hands tightened on the wheel. "By morning, I have to decide whether to sign the deal and save my job or fight the board and likely lose everything my father built." The unspoken question hung between them. Was integrity worth the price? When they reached the penthouse, Naomi launched herself into David's arms. Over her head, he mouthed, "Thank you," to Amara. Later, after Naomi was asleep, David found Amara on the balcony. "I keep thinking about what you said," she began, "about needing your daughter to know you could do the right thing. No one has ever seen me make that kind of choice. My father would say the right choice is whatever protects the company." She finally turned to face him. "I think I'm terrified of finding out who I am without the title of CEO." The next morning, David sat in the back of the shareholder meeting in a borrowed suit. Marcus Reed and the board chairman, Samuel Carter, made their case, dismissing the issue as a personnel problem. Then it was Amara's turn. She walked to the podium with a single sheet of paper. "For 7 years, I have dedicated my life to this company," she began. "Our reputation for integrity has been my highest priority. That integrity is why I cannot, in good conscience, sign the TechVision acquisition agreement." Murmurs filled the room. "The financial models presented to this board are fundamentally flawed and deliberately misleading," she continued, her voice gaining strength as she laid out the evidence. When she finished, she placed her resignation letter on the podium. "If this deal proceeds, it will be without my participation. I refuse to build success on the broken lives of our employees." The room erupted into chaos. Hours later, the outcome was clear. The deal was dead. So was Amara's tenure as CEO. She kept her shares and a board seat, but her leadership role was over. As they left the headquarters together that evening, both professionally adrift, Amara surprised him by laughing, a genuine, unburdened sound. "You know what's strange? I feel lighter than I have in years," David understood. Freedom often felt that way, even when it came at a high price. 3 weeks later, David was kneeling in a community garden, showing Naomi how to plant tomatoes, when his phone rang. It was Amara. They had started a new venture together, a responsible investment fund. "The funding came through," she announced. "We can present the offer next week." David smiled, watching Naomi water the seedlings. "That's 200 jobs saved," he said quietly. "A good start." Amara's voice softened. "Are you two still coming for dinner tonight?" I tried that pasta recipe. The casual domesticity of the question was striking. "Wouldn't miss it," he replied. "Naomi made you something." That evening, in Amara's penthouse, now warmed by books, plants, and Naomi's scattered toys, they celebrated. Naomi presented Amara with a drawing of 3 figures in a garden under a smiling sun. "It's us," she explained. "You, me, and Dad." Amara's eyes glistened as she hugged the little girl. Over Naomi's head, her gaze met David's, a world of unspoken feeling passing between them. 6 months after the failed acquisition, life had found a new rhythm. Their firm, Phoenix Capital, was thriving. David's financial acumen, sharpened by hardship, was in full force. Amara had discovered a gift for turning around struggling companies without the usual human cost. Naomi flourished, her health stable. The 3 of them had become a family, unconventional but honest. On a crisp autumn evening, they walked through Millennium Park. Naomi ran ahead to the Cloud Gate sculpture, leaving them alone. "Do you ever regret it?" David asked. "Walking away from everything you built?" Amara watched Naomi's reflection multiply in the curved steel. "I didn't walk away from what mattered," she said, her hand finding his. "I just finally understood what was worth building." They stood together, watching Naomi laugh, 2 people who had lost nearly everything, only to find that new beginnings often rise from the most unexpected moments, like when a janitor stands up in a boardroom and changes the course of countless lives with a single courageous truth. Sometimes the most valuable deals aren't signed on paper, but are written on the heart with courage, second chances, and the family you choose.